All Sails Set, Chapter 6. The flying cloud had picked up the northeast trades. With this rousing breeze on her starboard quarter, and every sail set from spanker to flying jib, and drawing handsomely, she was laying knots behind her. Here, for 20 degrees of ocean, the wind hauls out of the east-northeast, and blows scarcely shifting a hand's breadth the year round. All hands had been sent aloft to set the stunsails, which added some 15 feet to the ship's wingspread. With the yards braced up just clear of the backstays, we fled south beneath the summer sky. There was no need now to touch sheet or stay, and for that we greenhorns were grateful, for we had been serving an unrelenting apprenticeship under the watchful eyes of the mates. Day and night, loosing and setting sail, clewing up canvas and furling it, reefing topsails and courses, shaking out reefs, and mastheading the topsails to the rolling rhythm of the shanties. Flying fish weather and oldsters were calling it. The oldsters were calling it, and the reason was not far to seek. Flying fish fled in skimming shoals at our approach, the sun glinting on their glassy wings. Dolphins played about our bows, arching, leaping, diving in their sportive capers. Beautifully formed fish they were, whose glistening bodies threw back rainbow colors from sun and sea and sky. Have you guys heard of flying fish?
Yeah.
They actually leap out of the water and they have wings.
Yeah.
The days now were a sheer delight. Running down the trades in a windship is to savor sea life at its finest. The incomparable blue of tropic water shot through with arrows of dancing light. Sea birds, white against the sky, motionless save for the quick, inquiring turn of their heads. The untroubled rim of the horizon, sharp as the edge of a sword, where it cleaves the lighter blue of sky. You who spend your lives in the pallid north can have but a small idea of this rich warmth. Go and see it. There was work to be done aplenty, for a ship, like a watch, is always out of repair. And it is part of a mate's duty to see that no man is ever idle. But our watches on deck were no longer spent waist-deep in swirling water, struggling with stubborn ropes and blocks. Grand fun it was to be aloft on some gently swaying yard, 200 feet above the ship and ocean, glancing down occasionally at the wake stretching white and straight as far as the eye could see, telling its story of a fine passage in the making, and birds darting low to look at you, their eyes bright with curiosity, their hoarse voices falling not unpleasantly on the ear. Don't read about it. Go and see it for yourselves. Our heavier clothing had been put aside till it should be needed again in the sterner latitudes to the south. We were reduced to duck pants, and with or without undershirt, and our bare feet rejoiced in their deliverance from sodden boots and shoes. But the best interests of veracity compel the admission that this tropic weather was not an undiluted blessing. He's saying it's not all good. For out of every crack and crevice in the ship, cockroaches swarmed. Hundreds, thousands, finally millions of them. You would have said that a new ship like the Cloud would have been free of such pests. No siree. Though we killed them by the thousand, fresh battalions filled the places of the slain. They seemed to materialize out of the air itself. They devoured every crumb left in the locker. They were sturdy swimmers, and they rode like corks on the surface of every mug of coffee in the galley. Eventually, we acknowledged ourselves whipped and turned into our bunks at night with our shoes on to keep them from gnawing the soles of our feet. Now in the trades, we apprentices began to learn something of the whole business of being a seaman, as our indentures put it. On quiet nights, there were hours of study. Under Mr. Andrews' indulgent eye, we worked up the noon sights by way of practice and learned to write entries for the log. There were 2 logs kept on shipboard, the official log of the old man, wherein were entered the details of hazard at sea, injury, death, trouble with the crew, etc., and the navigation log kept by the first mate, whose entries concerned winds, course, speed, and barometer readings. It was this latter log which we must learn to write up. At night, with the ships running easily, we searched to find all the stars of first magnitude and to distinguish one from another. Bowditch's Navigator was Mr. Andrews' Bible. He fairly crowded over any necessities of storm by day that enabled him to display his skill at double altitudes of the fixed stars by night. And when for a span of days and nights there had been no help possible for sun, moon, or stars, his dead reckoning was faultless. He could have navigated a ship, I truly believe, by the movements of the upper and lower clouds, and the behavior of the birds, and the wind against his cheek. Meaning he didn't need the celestial beings like most people did. He felt it. A handful of degrees was less accurate, it seemed, than the sixth sense, which had its root in his vast practical knowledge. Sometimes in the dining saloon, by the light of the gently swaying lamp, we spread our books about us and belabored our brains with knotty problems of navigation and logarithms and rules of the road. Ah, it was all fun, you can believe. The roaring 40s and Cape Horn. They lay ahead, grim with threat, as the oldsters never ceased to remind us. But we were filled with the spirit of adventure, and so sufficient unto the day. On our 21st day out, we knew that we were in the region of the equator, and we of the half-deck were speculating as to the ceremonies of crossing the line, fearsome tales of which we had all heard. The line meaning the equator. It happened to be my trick at the wheel that morning from 10 till 12 o'clock. As the sun drew near the meridian, the old man and the first mate were occupied, as usual, in taking independent sights. After Captain Creasy had worked the observation, he turned to the mate, and I thought I caught an unaccustomed glint of humor in his eye. "Mister," he observed, "we're just abaft the line. Send a man aloft to report if anything's in sight." "Aye, aye, sir," responded the mate solemnly. And shortly thereafter a voice sang out from the fore-t'gallant masthead, "Sail ho!" "Where away?" cried the old man. "Down, dead ahead, sir, bearing straight down on us." "What manner of ship is she?" "I can't rightly say, sir. Might be pirates." "Turn all hands to," the old man shouted, busy with his spyglass. When the apprentices of the other watch appeared, we were all dispatched to the 'tween decks to break open a case of firearms, but no sooner were we safely below decks than the scuttle was banged shut above our heads, and we were trapped as snug as a parcel of rats. Now we heard a great commotion on deck, and the rush of feet above our heads. Then a deep voice seemed to boom from beneath our bows. "Flying Cloud, ahoy!" The old man answered, "Hoo, halloo!" "Got any landlubbers aboard?" "Aye, aye, Neptune." "I'm right glad to hear it," boomed the voice, which put us in mind somewhat of Tom Plunkett's. "How many?" "Oh, 10 or a dozen likely lads who are willing to lose their beards if they can get a passport." "Back your main yards," replied Father Neptune, "and I'll come aboard and trim their beards in 2 shakes of a gull's rudder." There was scrambling in the chains and a thudding of feet on the deck as the captain welcomed his guests with loud commotion. "Come, come," cried Father Neptune impatiently. "Bring 'em forth. I've several ships to visit before nightfall. Barber, whet up that razor. We'll give these lads a passport to navigate these waters for the rest of their natural lives, if they don't die a natural death afore that." As luck would have it, when the mate opened the scuttle, I was the nearest one to hand, and he grabbed me by the scruff and hauled me up on deck. There I stood blinking in the strong sunlight. Father Neptune was awaiting me, surrounded by his court and flanked by Mrs. Neptune. His Majesty sported a beard of frayed hemp, while his rope yarn locks were crowned with a coronet of gulfweed. His hand clutched a harpoon in lieu of a scepter. Mrs. Neptune, whose cheeks bloomed with a flush of red lead, was clothed in a gown of sailcloth with a fishnet veil. When she smiled, her 4 missing front teeth proclaimed her kinship to Caleb Winthrop.
What?
They're playing a prank on the boys. They're making it seem like Neptune, who is the god of the sea, has come aboard the ship to teach them a lesson. But it's really men from the crew. "You're a likely-looking lad," said His Majesty, addressing himself to me. "I want subjects like you, but there are certain purification rites which must be performed before you will be worthy to enter my domain. First, you must be shaved. Barber, apply the brush and hand me my razor." Zeke Rilling was the barber, and he laid about my chin and lower jaw with a huge brush that had been dipped in tar and fish oil.
Ew.
"Have you ever been shaved before, young fellow, my lad?" asked Father Neptune. "No," I replied respectfully. "What say?" he demanded. "No, sir," I answered yet again. "Louder, please," cried His Majesty. "My hearing ain't so good." Whereupon I opened my mouth and shouted, "No!" Scarce had I opened my mouth when the barber plunged the tar brush down my throat, and I sputtered and gagged to the vast delight of the audience. "Has my razor a proper edge to it, barber?" asked Neptune. "Aye, aye, sir. Keen as a shark's tooth you'll find it," came the answer. The razor was fashioned from an old iron hoop and had an edge like a buck saw. Father Neptune manipulated it in much the same manner, and every time it was drawn across my jaws, it left a wake of blood. Involuntarily, I opened my mouth to protest, which afforded the barber another chance to thrust with his tar brush. "Now speak right up, lad," said Father Neptune when this ordeal had come to an end. "There is a pledge you must swear if you want to be one of my subjects. Do swear never to eat meat when you can get fish, that is, unless you prefer meat." "I do," I answered, keeping my lips as tightly closed as possible. "Talk louder, my lad, there's fog in my ears." "Do you swear to never swim when you can walk?"
I do.
"That is, unless you prefer to swim." "Yes," I muttered between clenched teeth. Come, I can't hear you," protested Father Neptune. "Hand the lad my speaking horn so's he can make himself heard. Do you swear never to drink grog when you can drink water? That is, unless you prefer grog. Speak out!" I put the horn to my lips and opened my mouth to shout, "I do!" when the barber emptied a bucket of bilge down the horn. Oh,
What's bilge?
salt water.
Ugh.
I flung the accursed thing aside, but not before I had compelled to swallow a goodly bit to save myself from suffocating. As I gagged and sputtered, Neptune bellowed, "Give the lad his passport!" At the same moment, the plank on which I was seated was knocked from under me, and I found myself sprawling, feet over ears, in the water. For one wild second, I thought that they had thrown me overboard. I struck out to save myself and barked my shins against planking. To my sheepish amazement, I found I was wallowing about in the ship's longboat, which had been filled and placed strategically for the purpose. Soaked to the skin, I scrambled out to the japes and horse laughs of the sidelines. Now that I was an initiate, I could take my place in the audience and raise my voice at the plight of my shipmates, as one by one they were led before Father Neptune. They were all shaved in succession, and the proceedings varied somewhat with each one, thus providing a continuous source of laughter for the jolly sons of Neptune. The ceremonies, I knew, varied on each ship according to the temper of the commander and the good nature of the crew. Usually they were no more than harmless horseplay, but I heard of instances where the joke had been carried to such lengths as to border on tragedy. In fact, many sailors of the 50s had such a dread of the mysterious ceremonies which were supposed to take place at the crossing of the line that nothing could induce them to sign on a ship bound south of the equator. There is a region just above and below the lazy line that is known to charts and skippers as the area of calms and variables, more commonly the doldrums, a baffling belt of weather where winds and currents follow no known laws, and the temper of a ship's crew is strained to the snapping point. For some days before we entered this region, the northeast trades had slackened, then finally disappeared. With them vanished the sparkling sea. The skies were sultry with thunderheads and fretted with flares of heat lightning, while the masts of the flying cloud seemed almost to scrape at the low-lying clouds. A glassy calm flattened the surface of the sea, and in the distance a vortex on the horizon lifted in a coppery spout of moving water. The doldrums, they held us prisoned in their grip. Cat's paws of fickle wind stirred up out of nowhere to keep us busy, for not a breath must we lose. We were forever hauling round the yards to take advantage of each shifting breeze, so they would have to change the positioning of the sails to catch any breeze that they could to get moving in the direction they needed to go, because there wasn't a constant wind from any direction. The sails slatted and jeered at us in the fickle airs that at any moment might become a dangerous threat to a ship wearing full canvas. Lightning lit up the surrounding ocean to ghastly brilliance. The ear-splitting crashes that followed bespoke its nearness. Between the crashes, the stillness was so profound that the ear buzzed with the silence. Our sails sagged, inert, dejected. Then rain descended, a stinging deluge, a vertical curtain of water that struck the deck with a loud drumming and splashed upward in spitting cataracts. We stopped up the scuppers to let the decks fill with the fresh water, then brought out every available bucket and pan. We took off our clothes and found long-forgotten bits of soap and knew the luxury of sweet water against our skins. We remembered laundry, and soon shirts and pants and drawers were hanging from every stay, like a wash-day harbor decoration. Still the deluge descended. Water oozed from every pore of the ship, while the ropes swelled in the throats of the blocks and became unmanageable. Grueling work they made for hands grown soft with soaking. The area of calms and variables. At one moment the cloud lay lifeless, without a quiver on the plain of the sea. Again, under the drive of a sudden bursting squall, she would be blowing along with her lee rail buried, and an anxious mate watching for the moment when she could take no more. Then it was, "All hands to shorten sail!" And a merry time we had of it, you can believe. The sullen tempers in the forecastle, lulled somewhat by the fine weather of the trades, now began to respond to the strain of the doldrums. Quarrels flared into open breaks. Fists were raised and blows struck. Means the men were fighting. The smallest slight, that means insult, was magnified into a grievance. The grievance smoldered into hate. There was, moreover, trouble on the poop. It was an open secret that the old man and the first mate were at loggerheads. The overweening masterfulness of the one striking sparks from the bad temper of the other. The mate, in addition to a brutality that exercised itself on all hands, was a shirker as well, and numerous times since the start of the voyage he had been known to criticize his brother officers and even the captain within hearing of the crew. The old man was forever finding fault with the trim of a yard or the stow of a sail, and relations between the two men were close to an open break. The mate vented his spite on the crew. Thus the atmosphere within the forecastle was as uncertain and charged with electricity as was that of the poop. In the flying cloud, Jeter Sneed was always first to give voice to the dissatisfaction of the men, Who can say what were the forces that produced such a character as Sneed's? Spewed up out of the gutters of some seaport, the glitter of his eyes bespoke a nature that was as dangerous as dynamite. Ever since the day of our fight on the forecastle head, we had avoided each other by unspoken assent, as much as possible within the narrow confines of the ship. But in those moments when we came, perforce, face to face, the malignancy of his look would have chilled a stouter heart than mine. I was ever on the watch, alow or aloft, if Sneed were within a fathom's length. Due to his influence, the forecastle of the Clouds seethed with currents and cross-currents of suspicion and dissatisfaction. Invariably, the weaker members of the crew are attracted to a leader of this sort, and it is usually a small thing that touches off the gunpowder that forms their composite mind. As one day merged into another, caught within the exasperating grip of the doldrums, a party of malcontents began to form. Jeter Sneed, assuming leadership, persuaded his followers that they were underpaid, underfed, overworked, and generally abused. It was the food that brought the affairs to a final crisis. Returning from the galley one morning with his portion of salt horse, Sneed shook it under the noses of his cronies in the forecastle. "Look at this bloody hunk of granite," he snarled. "A feller could carve a ship model out of it if he had a knife keen enough." "Right you are, matey," piped up the shrill voice of Slim Harkins, who was Sneed's prime minister. Swiftly Sneed turned upon the man. "Right I am I?" he mocked. "Well, why don't ye do something about it, then? If you jelly-livered sons of perdition had an ounce of blood in your veins, ye'd stand up to the old man and demand your rights proper like men." This was the tone of mutiny, sure enough, and it struck a responsive note in the score of breasts. "We orter demand our blinkin' rights," echoed Slim Harkins. "Why should we break our ruddy necks to make money for the owners when all we get out of it is a fip penny bit? Let's up and at the old man and tell him what we think of the way he runs his blasted barge. And unless he mends his ways, we'll take over the ship ourselves and put in for South Ameriky." "Aye," assented Jeter Sneed. "There's gold there as well as Californy, they say." "That's the idee," sounded a new voice. "A drivelin' buzzard the old man is, snatching food out of a poor sailor's belly. He oughter be keel-hauled proper." Keel-hauled? I don't know, maybe thrown overboard. Nils Olsson shouldered his hulk into the center of the crowd, his blue eyes crackling like Nordic ice. "What kind of sailors is ye men yet?" he demanded. What for you talking such foolish? Dis is mutiny. We will have no part in it." Only the power of his brawn saved him from being set upon. Sneed's eyes shifted before Olsson's, and he turned back toward his henchman, growling, "We'll settle with your kind later." A bottle of rum passed around was all that was needed to fortify the faltering. A score of men marched aft with pannikins in hand and blood in their eyes. At the foot of the lee poop ladder they halted. In approaching the poop by the lee side, they were adding insult to injury, and they knew it. Captain Creasy saw the men and stopped in his stride. Mr. Andrews moved to one side of him, Mr. Jones to the other. The old man stood there like a figure hacked out of stone, as prepared to meet this hazard as all others. "Well, men," he boomed, and his voice was terrible to hear, "what is the meaning of this?" Slim Harkins, who had been elected spokesman while Jeter Sneed reserved for himself the generalship of them, was shoved forward. Slim paused at the foot of the ladder. He started to speak. He swallowed violently. What he saw in the old man's face struck terror in his soul. He carefully rehearsed the string of complaints slipped from his wretched mind. Before the astonished eyes of his followers, he collapsed like a burst balloon and ran for the forecastle. A moment of panic all but stampeded the mutineers. Jeter Sneed leaped into the breach. He shouldered his way to the fore and thrust out his chin at the captain. "We all have our rights, mister," he shouted, lashing himself into a rage. His voice rose on a higher note as he yelled, "We ain't a-goin' to work no more unless—" "Unless what, you scum?" came the old man's ominous voice. "Unless we get some proper food and—" Sneed was in for it now. He could only go ahead. He started up the poop ladder. The old man stepped forward to meet him. "Here's food for the likes of you," the captain shouted, and swung his fist and caught Sneed fair in the mouth. The blow sent the man spinning backward down the ladder. He struck the deck with a crash that seemed like to break his spine, but he leaped to his feet and turned toward his followers. "Now's your chance," he screamed at his men. "You blitherin' swine! After him! Get the ruddy buzzard!" But the men, open-mouthed at the unexpected shape of events, turned to run for cover. The mates, armed with belaying pins, sprang after them. Blows rained thick and fast. Heads were cracked, and the men sprawled, howling on the decks. Sneed, seeing his army collapse behind him, ran for the weather bulwark. He vaulted up the rail and leaped into the ratlines. Mr. Andrews started in pursuit, still armed with his belaying pin. Up the narrowing web of the shrouds, Sneed fled with the mate at his heels. How he hoped to escape his fate, no one could hazard. Panic held possession of him, and he ran. Where could he possibly go? Looking upward, we could see him swing out over the futtocks in his haste, almost missing his hold, then into the maintop, scrambling toward the cross trees. Now he was out upon the swaying yard. There, a rat brought to bay. He turned to face his pursuer. "I'll have the law on you for this," he screamed. Like a rope walker, Mr. Andrews took the yard on a run, and we below gasped and held our breath. We heard the blow of his belaying pin as it cracked against Sneed's skull. We saw the man's figure collapse, saw the mate with unbelievable strength grab the man by his neck as he fell and drag him back to the cross trees. Nils Olsson swarmed aloft to lend a hand carrying the inert figure down the shrouds. Thus the mutiny ended, almost as it began. The perpetrators were rounded up and clapped in irons on hardtack and water. So that means their food situation got even worse. When Jeter Sneed recovered from the blow dealt him by Mr. Andrews, he found himself at the end of a yard of chain ironed to a stanchion of the 'tween decks. Then, as a general discipline for the rest of us, orders were given to shift our entire spread of sails. 2 full days it took, with all hands on deck, and the mates saw to it that there was no sodgering. Roundly in our hearts we cursed Jeter Sneed and his cronies, but for the first time in weeks I breathed freely. Now I was able to drop the vigilance that had dogged my days and my nights. We had picked up the southeast trades, and once more the Flying Cloud was whipping through the water under every rag of canvas. With Sneed and his followers in irons, and fine weather prevailing again, good temper reigned in the forecastle. The days slipped by like magic. At night, new constellations were rising in the south, while old familiar ones dropped in the north. The Flying Cloud was on the larboard tack, and her course was full and by, which meant that the helmsman steered by the wind and not by the compass. A simple enough job, as I found when it came my trick at the wheel. If the night were too dark to watch the upper sails and keep them lifting, I could hold the vessel to her course by the feel of the wind on my cheek. While the mate napped in the lee of the poop, Brick and Lanny paused by the wheel and looked up at the night sky. "The next time we clap an eye on the North Star," Brick observed, "we will have doubled the Horn and be standing to the nor'ard." "Aye," agreed Lanny. "Old Tom Plunkett says that after you've rounded the Horn, the North Star is the first land you raise." As I stood there at the wheel, giving her a spoke or two now and then, I wished that this voyage might never come to an end, that you and I, Flying Cloud, might clip through this blue element to watch 1,000 days die in conflagration and 1,000 nights sparkle with the friendly eyes of the stars.